Howdy, eco-farmers. Welcome to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a conversational podcast where we will explore sustainable farming, real-world regenerative practices, and the latest innovations and technology shaping the future of ecological agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. This episode of the podcast is proudly supported by Azure Standard and American Farmland Trust, two organizations that are deeply committed to strengthening farms, building healthier food systems, and promoting land stewardship across the country. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres U.S.A. Now let's get into today's conversation. All right, we are joined with Kelly Ryerson, the glyphosate girl. Welcome to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, Kelly.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I think we're here mainly because we haven't had you on the podcast before. I've always wanted you, but also we have some news coming out of Florida that's slightly concerning. I know you're kind of working on the ground in Florida. So do you want to give a little bit of an intro or overview of what we have happening in Florida right now that's important?
Yes, it's so important. And this just popped up a few weeks ago. It was very quietly put into the Florida Farm Bill, the state level Farm Bill. They have slid in a provision that is really outrageous into both the Senate and the House versions that is going to effectively gag all people that criticize farming practices or any of the commodities that come out of Florida. I think so, thinking sugar. And it will make it so that if you criticize practices or pesticides, then you are going to be liable for defamation. And so then the chemical companies, Big Sugar, can come after you and sue you and effectively bankrupt you in the process, even if the person who did the original debating and critique was ultimately correct. It's a method that the chemical companies are using to silence all critics. And what's really frightening about this is, well, several things are. One, of course, it's unconstitutional against the First Amendment to limit free speech. Second, Florida actually has already passed anti-defamation laws around food. So they're already in existence is a law that you can't defame or say, really even debate the health of a perishable food. So, for example, there's the coating appeal that is put on the outside of a lot of fruits and veggies, particularly fruits, and it's not labeled. And so a lot of people are actually having some reactions to it. And because of that critique, there's a woman that has now been sued for millions of dollars for defamation in Florida because that was a perishable item that she was criticizing. And so that seems like that should be unconstitutional to say people can't say anything about these things. But in fact, it went up through the court system and it held as not against the right to free speech. So what Florida has done is they took this existing defamation law and they've expanded it now by adding, and also you can't criticize perishable foods or agricultural processes or pesticides or the products that come from them. And so it's a really broad sweeping thing that will really quiet all of the activists. But it's not just that, it's nutritionists, it's doctors, it's journalists, it's farmers, it's everyone that works in food systems that potentially is impacted by it.
When you reverse engineer how this came about, what is driving this? Like, some people would think that this coming out of Florida might be surprising. You would think it would be a free speech type place that you would, people left California to go to Florida. I think you probably did the same.
Yes, but exactly.
So how does this happen?
So it is wild because, Floridians are proud of their free state, right? They're like, people genuinely have moved here during COVID and other times just to have that freedom. And so now to have free speech stifled is really shocking to a lot of people, probably especially the people that have moved here more recently. And there are a few things that are brewing behind the scenes that are leading to this. One is the ongoing arguments around Bayer and the pesticide liability shield, which I don't know if you've talked previously about, but just in summary, Bayer is standing on the brink of bankruptcy due to all of the glyphosate trials. Their stock prices has plummeted And a few years ago, Bayer said, okay, well, we have this multi-pronged plan how we are going to get out of this litigation and all the fines or all of the settlements that are coming from it. And meanwhile, this is over 100,000 lawsuits now at this point. This is so many that they keep on settling out of court. And so
is
what
this
they
separate? This is separate from glyphosate.
This is
Or is-
glyphosate.
Okay, it's this guy. Because then there was yeah, we had Charles Benbrook on the podcast last year, and he was talking about essentially there's going to be lawsuits starting to come down the pipe with people who are getting
Parkinson's.
Parkinson's, and then that
Yeah.
could be another. So they could be preemptively, putting these things in place so they don't get hit with another giant load of cases that would, bankrupt them probably.
100%. And the way that they're setting this up, so they're trying to set up these state levels and federal level liability shields so you can no longer sue any pesticide manufacturer if you get sick from exposure. And it's really close to happening, actually. So if you live in the state of Georgia and North Dakota at this point, you can no longer sue pesticide manufacturers when you get sick from exposure to pesticides. Like that's done. From 57,000 different pesticides, you cannot sue. They are trying to pass this right now. We just beat it in Tennessee. They're trying to pass it in Kansas and Wyoming. Florida is coming up next. They're also, G.T. Thompson just slid it into the House version of the Farm Bill so that we will no longer be able to sue chemical manufacturers federally if we get sick from pesticide exposure. So once again, this covers paraquat, all of these things that have atrazine, glyphosate, all these things are connected to disease. So it's totally stripping American rights and entirely handing all the power over to these foreign chemical manufacturers, including ChemChina. ChemChina manufactures paraquat, which causes Parkinson's disease. So China banned paraquat because it causes Parkinson's disease and then sells it here. And then they're going to put in a liability shield that we can't sue when we get Parkinson's from paraquat. So we can't sue. It's just, I've never seen anything like this. And so they're trying to pass this also in Florida. And so last year, they introduced this lawsuit or this bill in Florida, which so many Congress people seem more than willing to jump on board for. And the chemical companies go in and they lie and they say, no, of course you can still sue. It has nothing to do with that. It just is about protecting the farmers. And so you have the Farm Bureau come in. And I just testified in Kansas recently. You had the Farm Bureau, you had Modern Ag Alliance, a nonprofit backed by Bayer. You had the Soybean Alliance, like all of them show up and they're testifying. And then, and then I say, well, but this doesn't stand for every farmer at all. In fact, some of our farmers are the sickest communities that we have. And it's just dismissed. So in Florida, they tried to pass a law like this last year, and Florida rose up. They're like, this is insanity. Absolutely not. No liability shield for pesticide companies. So it disappeared. Well, the pesticide companies really want to have that protection in Florida because so many pesticides are used in the state with all the different farming, especially, in sugar and citrus. And they know that they're not going to be able to pass it as long as people still have a voice to criticize pesticides. So the sequential nature of this is let's gag all the critics of pesticides and then we can pass the liability shield and then we win. And it's just, I'm going to Tallahassee next week to testify on this. People don't want it. No one wants this, but the lies that the lobbyists are feeding to these, to the state level Florida reps, it's just nauseating. It's just lies. And that's really what we're up against. And it's so hard when the opposition is willing to lie. Because, it takes a lot longer to try and disprove.
I suppose if they get it passed in the states, then it becomes a little bit easier to possibly get passed federally down the line. But is there anything coming from MAHA or RFK that you think that they could step in and prevent this?
So there's been so MAHA Action is the PAC associated with the MAHA movement and Bobby Kennedy, and they have been supportive in trying to get some calls to action out there. And part of the problem is now Bobby Kennedy famously was an attorney who sued Monsanto. He was involved in the glyphosate cancer cases, but he isn't allowed to do anything about it. He had to give that up once he took the position in government. And so that's frustrating. But what's also annoying is that now the glyphosate cancer case, the Trump administration told the Supreme Court, you should go ahead and hear that case. And the Biden administration had said, don't hear it. Let's just you don't need to take this case up. It's just let's just move on. But the Trump administration said, yeah, go ahead and hear it, because they are in support of Bayer, by the way. So this Supreme Court case is going to be the ultimate glyphosate case. It's coming up in April. If the Supreme Court decides that you can't sue a pesticide company if the EPA says that a pesticide is safe. That's what they're trying to hide underneath the EPA labeling. So that's what the big Supreme Court situation is going to be. And that was when we really tried to do a huge push to not get the Supreme Court to take it up. And we're appalled when the Supreme Court took it up, because they have thousands of cases they can pick from, but they picked this one. Who is on the Supreme Court? Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas used to work for Monsanto and famously was in support of the patenting of seeds. So really the birth of chemical agriculture with him. So I feel like he should have to step down if RFK Jr. did, but there's been no such thing.
Yeah, it's frustrating because you hear, they'll put out some of the positive things that, may be going on, and then this stuff kind of gets snuck in the back door.
Yeah.
Because this is not mainstream news, what's happening in Florida.
It was totally not. And it's so amazing because this would just be the beginning. If it can pass in Florida, you can believe that it will happen elsewhere really rapidly, because a lot of people aren't as into the health and freedom that you have in Florida.
So why are they using pesticide as they're not saying herbicide or glyphosate? They're specifically calling it pesticide.
They're saying pesticides. Yeah.
What's the reasoning for that?
I think just to be a big catch-all, just as a favor to the pesticide industry. Yeah. I think that's what it is. Because but in a way, this is what we're kind of thinking about it with some of the MAHA people. We're like, this clearly is the moment we've been waiting for decades, where our power is getting big enough that enough people are understanding the risks around these farming practices that they're that scared, they're putting gag laws in order. So we're like, okay, so they must be actually seeing enough momentum on the opposition side from our side that they're needing to actually do something as egregious as a silencing. So in a way, that's a good sign of the momentum. But on the other hand, shutting that off is going to certainly set us back.
Hey all, here is a quick note from one of our sponsors, American Farmland Trust, who leads the conservation agriculture movement, focusing on the land, the practices used on that land, and the farmers and ranchers who steward the land. Working from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, AFT's mission is to keep farms and ranches thriving. Since its founding in 1980 as a membership-based organization, AFT has helped permanently protect over 8 million acres of agricultural land, advanced regenerative farming practices on millions of acres, and supported thousands of farm families. Find technical resources, network opportunities, and more at farmland.org. So say they get it passed. What does that look like then? What is the new reality of, say, a farmer in Florida or a food consumer in Florida?
So if that passes, then you're going to see a whole bunch. There are tons of nutritionists and wellness people that are, and journalists that exclusively write on these types of things, and the connection between pesticide exposure, things like, even in this case, it would be, well, that farmer's regenerative. Well, and that regenerative farmer says, I farmed regeneratively. I was able to decrease my inputs. My food is more nutrient dense. That could be grounds for a lawsuit, because then you're criticizing the alternative way of farming. So it really will shut up. People can do what they want, but you won't be able to do articles about it or be very public about it. The influencers in Florida won't be able to say anything about it. And so, same with the journalists, are not going to be able to write about it. And things and because the sugar industry is so heavily involved here as well, you have the entire MAHA movement and Bobby Kennedy himself saying sugar is poison. And so then that will be grounds for defamation lawsuits around sugar. And what's so interesting is Casey DeSantis has been doing a lot of work around food and cleaning it up, cleaning out the heavy metals, increasing nutrient density, thinking about where it comes from. And it's been really compelling. And just yesterday, actually, she did a press conference with Ron DeSantis, which was amazing. And they even had a sign behind them because they did this testing on all these different bread types. And there were high levels of glyphosate, of course, because of free harvest desiccation. But they both got up to the microphone talking about how that's unacceptable. And I was like, this is amazing. Now, that's something they will not be able to do if this law passes. And it's also interesting. I think that DeSantis is gunning for the Maha support for the presidential run, which I'm like, great, please champion farming,
What power would he have besides influence in this situation?
So we don't know for sure whether they've slid this gag law into such a large farm bill that has so many elements in it. And that's why we're working so hard at these committee levels before it gets finalized on like the House floor of Florida. Because they layer in other things. They do this back and forth bargaining as to what's going to be in the farm bill. So if someone wants this one thing, then they're not going to oppose the gag law if they get what they want. And that's really what we're seeing. So if this farm bill, which by the way, there's just been this huge freeze that has done a real number on Florida agriculture. So a lot of the fruits really are paying the price, and it's going to be a bad year because of the unprecedented freeze. So now there's even more urgency about passing this farm bill. And if that reaches DeSantis's desk, is he going to turn down the entire large farm bill that everyone's waiting for on behalf of this one section and send it back to committee? That's really the question. And he hasn't spoken up about it. We think he's probably aware just because so many of us have been tweeting for 2 weeks straight. Where are you? Where are you? And the other thing is that
did anyone ask him at the press conference yesterday?
No, and it's so sad. I would have driven over to West Palm to go and ask exactly that question. Because they won't be able to do that presentation, which is just wild.
It is interesting to think about how much money these companies must flow into our politicians. How frustrating is it to you that this is how the bill system works, where you could put 20 good things in it, and then they slip this one thing in, and it's take all or kill all.
Well, I'm just so tired of not having standalone bills anymore. It feels so rare. And they keep on doing this at the federal level, which makes it so much harder, and they know it. And I think that they need to now have a law where you can't have things that are completely unassociated. For example, at the federal level, just last month, there was the huge spending bill that everyone in DC and the country is waiting for. And so what do? They slide in a section for the pesticide liability shield in this enormous spending bill. And it makes it so much harder because they're anxiously trying to get this spending bill through. And once again, that negotiation for certain things. And so we're having to put on double pressure. And there's nothing that says it's ridiculous to have a liability shield put into a spending bill. I mean, that doesn't belong there at all. You could probably make a little more of an argument for it in the farm bill because it's somewhat, associated with farming. But it just makes it that much more challenging. And the other thing is just physically looking at these bills and how many things are densely packed into it. If you're just skimming through that, especially at the federal level, no one's raising any alarms about something, it just slides right through and no one ever knows. It's really a big problem with our bill system.
Well, and you can put something in there like, we want to save babies, and then you slip this other thing in, and they're like, see, that person doesn't want to save babies. How could they do that?
Totally. Yeah, doesn't want to save babies. Exactly. That's so true.
I mean, you see it. I think Thomas Massey kind of articulates it the best as far as just explaining it. It's sad that he's a unique politician in that way that even explains it to the general public, because I mean, we have no idea what's in these bills. There's no
idea. In the previous farm bill draft, in fact, last year, because this isn't the first time they tried to slide it into the farm bill. This has been happening over the last few years. The previous draft that came out of the House, I think it was like page 700 something. There were like 3 lines of taking away your ability to sue pesticide manufacturers, And I would go, it was before Maha had momentum, and I'd go in, I'd be like, have you looked at this page? And like every congressperson's like, oh, I didn't even see that. Of course they didn't,
So do you want to explain a little bit the pesticide companies that you talk about? Paraquat is owned by China, and you said that they banned it in China, but they are continuing to sell it in the United States. So we have a foreign entity selling, in theory, a possible poison that's going all over our soil.
That's right. That's what's happening. And it's just unbelievable, the hypocrisy. And it's been a political angle we've been trying to take because there's so much rallying and concern about China in general and how China's, doing all kinds of things in the United States. Um, and this one just seems like such a core thing that like China doesn't even have to attack us because we're attacking ourselves with their product. I mean, it's so crazy. And the
Yeah,
connection
it's like
between
it's a national security issue.
it's entirely national security issue. It's just wild. And and then we think of Bayer because we think of Monsanto being American, but it's not. I mean, it's German. So now we just have very few pesticides that are even manufactured here. Monsanto is no longer an American company. So all of this is to preserve the profits of the foreign pesticide companies. It's so wild. And the fact that we're bending over backwards and taking American rights just to make sure this German company, it keeps a solid stock price. That to me doesn't seem very like a good trade when I think of all the people I've met that have gotten cancer from glyphosate exposure. So yeah, that alone should be the argument that convinces a lot of Republican Congress people who are very, suspicious of China's intentions to back off of that, or at least with paraquat. I mean, there's so much evidence.
Do you think that they're actually so I don't like politics because it's just like it's so frustrating. Like, do you think that they're actually suspicious of China, and then they would claim what, that they don't know where their money's, like who's donating to them, is coming from?
Oh
Because
yeah,
anybody, yeah. So they're like, well, I didn't know that was. So they
but
just
yeah,
played like the dumb card.
totally. Yeah, it's always the dumb part. It always is. Or just like not realizing, oh, that's not what that means, even though they know that's what that means. Or the other thing is sort of just being lazy and not lying, but also not wanting to know, because if you don't know, then you're not culpable.
Yeah.
So letting people know is really important. But yeah, the ChemChina, I mean, I would say if China doesn't think it's safe for their citizens, then God knows we should not be considering it safe for our citizens.
Yeah, you would think that would just be some common sense. I feel like talking about the pesticides, we know glyphosate's, it has the cancer results, and they've been litigated for it. But what are the health issues that they're concerned about essentially getting lawsuits for? Like we talked about Parkinson's, but what else are people experiencing that they think is going back to pesticides? And part of the problem you can explain too is, do we have the science and the information that directly links these things to the
Yeah, that's a
pesticides?
big part of the problem because in order to actually have a lawsuit, you have to have such a large body of scientific research to base it on. And the EPA does most of its evaluations just based on private research that the companies provide them. And then they make their evaluation, which is why so much corruption can happen in the meantime, where just data is cherry picked and then that's what's given to the EPA only. And so they're making their decisions based off of things that are not independently sourced. So the independent research, which by and large, there's a lot of glyphosate research now, but with a lot of the other pesticides, you don't have this broad body of research that you can really realistically bring to litigation. There are some things like the connection to liver disease or kidney disease that are highly connected with glyphosate, and there might be enough if you could get someone. It's expensive to have a lawsuit, so there's a lot that goes behind it. And so I actually don't think that the risks are so huge outside of glyphosate and paraquat for the pesticide companies because of that reason. Like there's just such a high hurdle of research you need that doesn't really exist. So this seems like a really extreme measure. And I don't know
But
if
the glyphosate cases hurt them actually.
like
Like you,
big time.
yeah, because I always kind of thought about it like, they're shaving off pennies off the top of their giant mountain of profit that they already had. But you think that they felt the pain from these glyphosate litigations, and they really
They
are
have
probably forward.
like genuinely could bankrupt them. That's how bad
Yeah.
they are. Well, and this is the thing, like they're unwilling to stop the drain. And I was actually in the courtroom when the federal judge said, I have an idea. Why don't you put a label that just says the International Agency for Research on Cancer thinks that this might cause cancer? The EPA doesn't. and just put that on the thing. And then you're going to absolve yourself of all of this liability. And they will not do it. They will not put anything on the bottle. Meanwhile, if they did that, even if they didn't say, hey, this is connected to cancer, they could say someone else thinks it is. They would restore their, I think everyone would be happy except for Bayer, I guess. They just refuse to do it. And what's crazy too is recently there's a study that was proven during the Monsanto cancer trials to be fully ghostwritten. It's a study that the EPA has relied on for 2 decades to claim that glyphosate doesn't cause cancer. And during the trials, it's like, oh, wow, this was entirely written by Monsanto to say it doesn't cause cancer. They slapped some independent researchers on it to act like they didn't write it. And it's super crooked. And so finally, just a couple months ago, the study was retracted. And so now we're like, okay, EPA, what are you going to do about it? You always have pointed to this study that, oh, look, it doesn't cause cancer. There's just so much that goes down. But anyway, that goes back to the liability shields and why this is such a problem, because the way that they are setting up the liability shields is not saying you can't sue us. They're saying you can't sue us if the EPA says glyphosate is fine or whatever the pesticide is. And so, but if the EPA is relying on faulty research like this retracted study, well, then what? Like, it's just such a complicated thing and none of it is trustworthy along the lines. The only thing that you can be sure of is that people are getting sick from exposure. And things like ALS, with Gabe Brown and his ALS, my father-in-law actually died of it from pesticide exposure. And it's a gruesome, awful death. And that is it. The doctors at Duke University said, we always see this with people that have been highly exposed to pesticides. And it's like, okay, so then what? So are they totally out of luck because we don't have a big body of research to study which pesticides specifically cause ALS? It's such a rabbit hole.
And we don't know how to cure it.
We don't know how to cure it. It's a terminal sentence.
At least if you're going to give us the disease, you'd think their business model, they would like that. They would give us a disease and then they would find the cure for it.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe that's coming.
The endless cure.
The endless.
It can't actually be a cure. That wouldn't be a good business model, though.
No, it would have to just be a temporary treatment. Yeah.
Yeah, that you have to do the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Hey, eco farmers, this is Taylor Henry with Acres USA. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource for you. You need to check out the Acres USA membership and magazine. You farm in the physical world and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres USA magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres USA, but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were all hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. And finally, if you're like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. And to make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes. So what do you think, what can people on the ground do? What's the call to action to try to prevent this?
The call to action right now is, I had set up a website where you can sign up. It's called stoppoison.org. And you can go there and sign up and give me your information, and I will email you when your state has a liability shield or there's something local for you to deal with, or when we have to fight the farm bill to try and get the pesticide liability shield taken out. And then if you can be in Florida or out of Florida, all voices welcome. We're doing big call campaigns around the gag law there as well. And so same thing, if you can go to stoppoison.org and sign up, I'll send you alerts on that. And And you can follow me on Glyphosate Girl. That's me on Instagram and Twitter. And I'm putting up these calls to action there as well as soon as we have them. They happen so rapidly because things change really quickly as they try and outmaneuver us. So it's sort of regular updates.
Do you feel like the glyphosate issue has improved in the last 5 to 10 years, or are we still, I guess, what's like the update on that?
So I have been contemplating. Okay, so that I was so excited. I got my start as a blogger in the glyphosate cancer trials, um, and as Glyphosate Girl. And I was thinking those were such exciting days. So you had these huge victories, which probably everyone remembers, like, oh, thank goodness the truth is finally coming out that Monsanto, did things poorly and they're unethical and all that. And so there was such momentum and hope, and this is maybe the turning of this chemical era. And now when you see the repercussions of that and how now all of our rights might be stripped away for all pesticides, it's like, I mean, I want to say it was still worth it. I don't know that it was. It ultimately, all of our rights are stripped and we're much in a much worse situation. So that's just, you know, that's just disheartening. But I do think that thanks to organizations like Acres and other people and raising, there's so many more documentaries out on regenerative agriculture and the labeling in grocery stores with regenerative agriculture. And I think that we're at a huge tipping point from that perspective. And so I'm really excited because as those of us in the crowd know, if you can this pesticide issue goes away if you can embrace regenerative agriculture. So no one seems to be criticizing that at the moment, thank goodness. Um, and certainly with the investment from the USDA with the $700 million as a pilot program, that's a good sign. Coming from a Republican group, that's a pretty big deal. And NRCS is locked in. So I see a lot of hope with that stuff. It's just the other messy stuff. But thank goodness we all know this off ramp.
I'm a little bit concerned about with regenerative agriculture and like your perspective on it, and the farmers who are listening that might use chemicals still. I'm not. Farmers are in a tough place, and the problem is there isn't a lot of information about this. So a farmer will look at it and be like, well, this could be doing something to me, and it could be doing something to my soil, it could be doing something to my neighbor, but I don't know, and I can't make enough money right now to not use it. And regenerative kind of gives people an avenue to still, use glyphosate and use some of these other chemicals. And I think it's hurting the organic industry in some ways. Not that the organic industry is perfect, but I'm concerned. We always come to this moment in agriculture where you have a tagline like regenerative agriculture, and then we kind of need to put some sort of barriers around it so people can't just use the term widely, even if they're not necessarily practicing it. Do you have some of the concerns like that? Like when you say regenerative, technically in some of these regenerative programs, you can use chemicals still. You're supposed to, wean yourself off of them and move away from them. But now folks do have the opportunity to use it and then get rewarded on a price structure that's similar or competitive with organic, because now regenerative is getting kind of almost placed above organic in some ways. Like we don't know necessarily what these chemicals are doing to the soil. We know it makes farming easier, but other than that, like we're not sure still what this is all doing.
Yeah, I know that predicament of basically greenwashing regenerative agriculture or conventional agriculture by calling it regenerative. And it's such a hard sticking point. And of course, yeah, then the organic people are upset because then it's being diluted with regenerative, and then regenerative organic is the best, but that's so hard. And I think, I really see a future, and how do we do it? I don't know, but I see a future in the Regenified plan, where you're obligated, if you want to stay in the system, that you're constantly improving. So people, might not like, I love it. I think it's the step one. You can't do pre-harvest desiccation with pesticides.
Right.
You can use them otherwise. I mean, that's an enormous first step, right? And so, and I think the USDA is
let's not spray the thing right on it or before we eat it.
I mean, wouldn't that just be a big win across the board? In fact, I had a meeting with Lee Zeldin, the head of the EPA, in December. And I was like, that was my first ask. I'm like, do you know what the lowest hanging fruit is we have? It's freaking stop the pre-harvest desiccation. Let's fund the farmers for alternative drying methods if they really need it. That would be a really awesome thing you could do to massively improve public health. And so he hasn't moved on that quickly. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
but I do think that, and the USDA is also trying to determine, okay, what is that regenerative definition, so that doesn't, because they also have caution in not injuring organic. And I think that that's what's really interesting in this $700 million USDA grant, because it's the first time that it's outcomes based. So you have to prove the improvement in the soil in order to continue getting the grant. And so if you're spraying a lot of chemicals, you're not going to get that improvement in the soil to the same extent, if at all. And so that's sort of like starting to work from an outcomes-based perspective, I think is going to be really important with that. But yeah, I mean, it's not fair. It's totally not fair to organic if regenerative people that just went and sprayed all these chemicals had a much easier time, comes in and collects the same premium. I mean, that's not right.
Well, it's complex, and there's organic type of operations that aren't the best either.
Yeah.
And there is somewhat of an argument there as far as like, would you rather use a little bit of chemical or aggressive tillage, or what are we really doing to the soil in those situations? But that's the thing, we know what we're doing with tillage.
Mhm.
That's well documented. We still don't really know everything that happens, the long lasting effects of these chemicals. That's the concerning thing for me. That's why for us, we have a grazing operation, so it's easier for us. We don't use any of that stuff, and maybe that's a part of the solution. Let's turn some stuff more into grass more, but
right.
that's easier said than done.
Well, what's so scary about one of the many studies done on glyphosate that really scares me is this this idea of the Roundup babies. So there are studies that show that you don't even see the impact of glyphosate until it's 2 to 3 generations out, and then you start seeing that the children are injured in these animal studies. And the other one that really concerns me a great deal is there's a study that came out by Dr. Shauna Swan that, as she's at Mount Sinai, she's an excellent toxicologist. She showed that they measured the urinary levels of glyphosate in second trimester women, and then she measured the genital distance between the anus and the vagina of all the baby girls, and there was an elongation of that distance, meaning like a masculinization of the baby girls if the glyphosate levels were at a certain level, high level, in the urine of the second trimester woman. And I'm like, okay, if that's happening on a broad scale, what is happening here? I mean, we know it to be a significant endocrine disruptor, and it's showing now to even change the genitalia of the kids. So that kind of
And
thing.
what's the thought? Where did mom get it? Mom got it through food in those studies?
Food.
Well, there's obviously something going on. I mean,
totally.
I'm in the age, we just had our third kid, and then all of our friends are having kids, and I know miscarriages and things like that have happened forever, but man, there are people in our friend group that are our age trying to have kids, and they are just not having a lot of success, and
So
it
sad.
makes you wonder what's going on there. Yeah, it makes you sad. It is sad. It's people who deserve to be parents and want to be parents that can't. And I came from
and it
a
drives me.
cop world I came from a cop world where I saw people who shouldn't be parents have tons of kids all the time, and then you see the people who really deserve to have them can't have them.
It's just too heartbreaking. And yeah, the fertility rate's crashing. Testosterone is down 20%. And so I was really curious several years ago and had 4 semen samples sent into a lab. So I was like, I think glyphosate's in the semen. I don't know why it wouldn't be. And there's studies that show it kills sperm. And so I sent it to the lab. It all came back positive for glyphosate in semen. Even that was dietary exposure. That wasn't even farmer. And then a big study came out of French farmers showing how much glyphosate was in the semen. I'm like, that kills sperm. Like it's not confusing why, there's so many different insults. It's not just glyphosate, but it's like, how many heartbreaks do we have to have of infertile couples until we're going to address that? I have the same thing. Tons of friends unable to get pregnant. And it's too much. It's mean,
Yeah, it's sad. Well, and it's not good for the future of humanity. And but do we have studies? Like, are those numbers truly going up? Because I feel like the excuse always, like, when you compare it now to like the 60s and 70s, the excuse always like, well, we didn't really keep track of things that well back then, so we don't know if the numbers are increasing or not. It's
You
like,
know,
when are we going to know?
they're definitely increasing. In fact, I think it's something like 50, an average of 15% of people of childbearing age now are unable to get pregnant. And it's similar numbers for the women and the men in the situation. And it's like, okay, well, what is that?
The journey of trying to eat healthier foods it can be a very complicated one. Sometimes the complication is just as simple as, where do you find the right foods? And one of the things that is incredible about Azure is that they've taken that complexity and really simplified it. Everything you get from Azure is, clean food. Just the simplicity of it, to have that is amazing.
For more information, visit azurestandard.com.
Especially with the medical advancement now, you would think a lot of them back in the 60s and 70s might have been medical issues that should, in theory, be solved and found much earlier now. So we should be getting better at it. But if the numbers are showing that we're worse, I mean, that is concerning. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of environmental factors. It's not just coming from farming, but
certainly not. Yeah.
these are the things that need to get, these are the things that we need to get worked out. Like, is our underwear making that a problem too? Like all the things that you hear about, it's so difficult to keep your EMF. They're so difficult to stay up on all of it, even in the position that we're in with Acres. I mean, we focus on the farming stuff, but just from the environmental factors, seeing your friends and seeing people in your community, it is concerning. But I feel like we just don't ever get legitimate answers.
No, or they do, they're like immediately rewritten and skewed by whatever industry stands to not benefit from it.
Right. So you want to explain, like, from an insider industry, like, how do these studies that need to take place get funded? Who funds them? Someone's not going to fund getting rid of these super profitable products.
Yeah, no, that's why you don't see many studies on these things, really. But it can be independent foundations that will put money towards it. NIH actually does put money towards some of these things, but not greatly. In fact, I talked to our head of NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, who's awesome, and I said, well, how much? I actually, there are a lot of things when you're talking about like EMF, there are a lot of things I'd like to see funded. But anyway, my question was, we need a lot more research. How much research goes into pesticides at NIH? And he said, oh, it's just a tiny group, just tiny. And I'm like, okay, well, that explains a lot. That's why we don't have this body of research that we need. And how are we supposed to go up against because the regulators now because we don't fund other research, they fully depend on the company funded research. And so that's just going to always be a conflict of interest. So that makes it just that much more frustrating. But yeah, so you need, and it'll be interesting to see in the time that, you have Kennedy, head of HHS, which is head of NIH. What studies are we going to start to see coming out of there? Like, I've noticed that Kennedy is starting to focus on EMFs. I'm psyched because he actually was an attorney also suing regarding 5G towers being put right outside of people's like bedrooms, saying that that's damaging. So that's going to be interesting to see what comes out, maybe with a different administration.
How do you feel like RFK has done so far? I think a lot of people, when they're running the campaign, they're talking about getting all of these things done. It's easy to think that these things will happen after like a week or 2 weeks when they take over control.
Mm-hmm.
And then when things don't progress, you almost feel like you were a little bit duped in some ways. I think overall, RFK, I've been impressed with everything he's done. I just wonder how much internal pressure he gets, because he's a politician now. He's not talking
It's
like
so
he was
weird.
6-7 years. I know. Like he's said, they've got him to say some things where they're like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like he would have, he was a wild boy 8 years ago.
Totally. I mean, the things he'd say. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, he must be the same person in there, right? But he must just be totally limited.
Like, have you sensed that? I truly do not try to follow politics. I get sucked into it once in a while. I've had that sense where he said some things where I'm like, I bet he doesn't really believe that or feel that. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I just, he wasn't so excited about having everyone on Ozempic or what have you,
Yeah.
He was, and this is the thing that happened in the beginning. So the Mohawk Commission report, the first report that was put out the Mohawk Commission is a bunch of leaders of the different agencies. And so in May, we all gather. We're so excited. Trump comes, like there's an announcement of the commission report. And in there talks about understanding pesticides and other toxins and how they accumulate and work together and like what problems is that causing. It seemed totally rational. And then by the time the second follow-up report came, like all that had been taken out. And the only thing left was the EPA will do a better job explaining to people why their stuff is safe. And it's like, oh my God. So he clearly got his area taken care of, and then the EPA wasn't on board. I mean, that's what it looks like to me just from that. And so I wish that somehow EPA could fall under HHS, because I think it would be a different story.
Yeah. It's I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction in some ways, and it is a slow. Like we're years and years and years inside of this intertwined mess, and I'm sure even a lot of the folks who run for these positions in office get in, and then they get, I always picture someone coming into an office, the door closes behind them, and they're like, "All right, so this is how things actually work."
Totally.
And, yeah, like you ran a good campaign, but some of these things you're not going to be able to do, and this is why. And I don't know, they might have legitimate reasons for it.
They might have legitimate reasons. It's just so frustrating to watch from the outside, or maybe it's more frustrating on the inside. If you believe something to your core and then you're told no, that's also heartbreaking.
Yeah, I especially, I just take the stance of not being educated enough on some of these things, where I just hope that people are making decent decisions. I assume they're not, but I try to keep my head in the sand on some things and just focus on trying to, promote high-level farming practices. How did you get into all of this? Like this doesn't, no offense, but it doesn't seem like you live like the funnest of lives. Like you don't do like the most fun work.
And my dad is always like, "Can you stop? Just go enjoy your life." I'm like, I can't now. So I had chronic illness, and I had like an autoimmune condition and was very sick, and with no answers as to why I was so sick, and like, saw over 20 specialists, was put on all these drugs, and like, told me I was crazy. So and I had so many symptoms everywhere that maybe it did seem crazy, but like things like neuropathy, stomach problems, losing hair, rashes, like a whole bunch of things. And then finally I had a vitamin test from a psychiatrist, by the way, because I'm finally like, I should go see the psychiatrist. Everyone says I'm crazy. And I had no nutrients whatsoever. Like my vitamin levels, I mean, I was nearly a dead person. And then I realized I needed to give up gluten. And then suddenly I started getting just so much healthier so fast, was able to get off of the medications, and then started eating organically and started thinking about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So I was really PO'd about not being able to have gluten because I really missed it. And so I went to this conference at Columbia University they were having on gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. And they're like, we don't really know what's causing it. And so I said, well, are they spraying anything on the field at the farm level? Now, I knew nothing about farming. And they said no. And then someone from General Mills found me and came up afterwards and said, yeah, and explained to me pre-harvest desiccation and said, so Roundup is sprayed. I'm like, well, everyone's going to be gluten intolerant, not knowing that's not just the only reason why you become gluten intolerant. And they said, well, it's going to take 2 decades to get farmers to change their practices. And I was like, that is too long if weed killer is being sprayed on there. And so at that actually a few years later, then there was the cancer trials were starting, and I was living in San Francisco, and I was like, I'm going to go check that out. At that point, I was so mad at Monsanto. Like I had a sign, I was going to go to a protest. And then I got there and there was no protest, nothing. I just walked right into the courthouse and sat right next to Bobby Kennedy. And I was like, hi. And then of course they thought I was a spy, because what random person shows up to a trial like that? And then I quit my job at the time and started blogging everything. So got to see, Chuck Benbrook do he's amazing on Stand, and all these incredible people, and got fully engulfed into this pesticide world. Because then once you see the egregiousness and how many people are injured and just meeting these victims, it's so heartbreaking. And there was a moment that when I was really sick and I was put into a full body MRI, because I was like, I thought I was going to have MS or something. And so during the 2-hour MRI, I started like making bargains with God. And I'm like, if you bring me through this so I can be around for my kids, then I will do everything I can to not have other people sick. And so I feel like, and I came out of the MRI and they said, your MRI is clean. And I was like, okay. So I feel like I've made a deal with God for now to be really trying to advocate on behalf of humanity. And so that's what keeps me going when I'm feeling really bummed.
This year's 50th annual Acres USA EcoA conference was one for the record books, and now you can relive many of the inspiring moments. The 2025 EcoAg recordings are now available for purchase, featuring all keynotes, breakout sessions, and other expert presentations from the nation's leading ecological ag thinkers and practitioners, such as Gabe Brown, Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Nation Winters, and Dr. Don Huber, and many more. Whether you're a farmer, rancher, educator, or ag professional, these recordings put the best of sustainable agriculture at your fingertips, so you can learn at your own pace, revisit ideas, and take your operation to the next level. Don't miss out. Head to our conference.acresusa.com and get your complete set of the 2025 EcoAg recordings today. Your soil, your farm, and your future will thank you. Well, we appreciate your effort and appreciate everything that you do. I would not want to trade places with you. Yeah, we've been fortunate to get to know Chuck Benbrook pretty well. He writes for us consistently in the magazine, and then we had him on a podcast. He had some pretty amazing stories, some scary stories as well.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's such a he's so important to this whole movement.
Yeah, and he really wasn't publishing anywhere, and I'm fortunate that someone pointed him our direction, because he's been great for everything he's done for us.
Awesome.
So you've formed a pretty big following, and how do you reverse engineer that? Like, what do you think? Like, who are the people? What's the demographic of the person who is listening to you? Because it's, generally speaking, we're going to be able to make an impact through the masses. And I think this is a popular subject, even if it doesn't get talked about on mainstream media. So how have you reverse engineered like the demographics of your audience, of people who are interested in this? Like, who are they? What do they look like? What's happening to them?
In the beginning, you had very like hippie, natural types of people involved in like early wellness. And then over COVID, I saw this huge shift in my followers. And suddenly I had super, super conservative, mostly women. I think my followers are like 85% women. Very conservative, very religious people that feel that their opinions on life and, their religious aspect even that can't accommodate continuing to be poisoning their families with toxins, not just pesticides, but like across the board. So plastics and things. And so I started falling into that category. And it was interesting because I always had felt that if some of the churches in the Southern Baptist Convention and these conservative organizations could wrap their head around, particularly pro-life organizations, what this is doing to fertility, that it would be something that they would absolutely want to champion. And interestingly, the Heritage Foundation, I've been doing some work with them, and they're really starting to become interested in this. And so it's the best, because what would be the best thing is to have a purple movement, where it's a moment that we can all agree on something so vital as to our future in fertility, but also just health. And so to see both sides now showing interest, I think like that's what gives me hope. It's amazing. Like that's just something that wasn't happening. I'm like, oh, you know what? We disagree on so many things, but this is something that really is bringing people together. So that's
right. So pitch me. Here's one of my theories. Is exactly what you described is kind of what I thought you were going to say. Is we had, because all of this like soil health, chemical stuff, that was a democratic liberal type of idea back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is this conservative religious groups. You mentioned the Heritage Foundation. I don't know much about them. I know we get a lot of letters of our audience of people who don't like them, that I don't really know the connection. I don't know much about them. But I know
they're
we have
for sure.
Right. So we have this clash of different political ideologies that are separated based on social problems. And part of my theory is like, how are we ever going to be able to gain momentum in this type of movement when half of the people are voting separately? And like we talked about, all these bills get tied into 100 different subjects that maybe even have some of these social issues. Or like when people are voting for people, you have these social problems that I think are really just emotional type of triggers for people to lean a certain way. but then we can't ever get in line enough to solve issues like this, because I would say there's over 50% of the people are interested in solving this problem. But of that, 25% are Democrat, 25% are conservative, and they're never going to vote the same. And then you have like the 10% that are wide, like on the very ends of those spectrums.
Yeah.
But we all understand these are the problems, but how do we align on something like this if we can't vote for the same person, if that makes sense?
It's
I think
so
it's one of our biggest
problematic.
issues.
This is something like we're really talking about in the greater Maha movement, and what we would like to see for exactly this reason. I mean, I'm independent and I'll go where the issue goes. And I just have always felt that everyone needs to pay attention to this. And it has historically been Democrats, and we're trying to get some of the Republicans are open to this idea, but by and large, you have Republican Congress people and senators that have been there forever and are never going to change their ways. So that just needs to be flushed out, because they're just completely stuck. And I think that they will always think that these issues are left, and so we can't support them. And so that is problematic right now. But as you see this younger generation of the conservative kids coming along, they're focusing so much on health. This is broadly happening. It's a huge movement. That can't stand. And so what we're really trying to do is, but also just grow this purple health movement and make it so vital, the independent part, that both parties have to fight to have that voting block, which is what happened in the last election. How Trump won. It's the big Maha block. So maybe it's not called Maha, maybe it's something else, but can we get them to try to compete with each other for who can be more aligned for healthy soils, healthy food, and all of that? That's sort of the ultimate goal, because I think, to your point, at any time, even to this today, because Maha was a Republican thing, you see some Democrats stepping back from the food movement because they're like, oh, that's a Republican thing. I'm like, oh, heck no, we're not going to start doing that now. No, this is forever been a Democrat thing.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. They made an argument that, like, when they got rid of Coke off of Snap, they're like, it was amazing to see the arguments for it.
Oh my gosh. Kristen Gillibrand came out and she said, well, you've got to keep that there. That's their right to be buying it with SNAP dollars and everything. I'm like, what is going on with you? You should be happy that the junk food can't be bought.
Yeah, I know that it's too bad. And there's people that won't even like look at what Maha has done as a positive, because it is tied to the Republican Party.
Yeah. It's so disappointing.
It's too bad it has to be.
They're amazing. Yeah. I mean, amazing stuff like that food pyramid is amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's unbelievable that it took this long, but
it really is shocking. And the stuff that's coming up soon that generally recognized as safe, the grass loophole, which is how so many chemicals have gotten into our food supply, not pesticides, but other chemicals, by basically manufacturers lying and saying they're just generally recognized as safe. So there are no safety studies done on them. So they got into our food supply. So the Kennedy plan is they are not only going to close that loophole, but they're going to go retroactively to the chemicals that have been added and start demanding that actually the studies and the proof of safety are done. So that's bad news for Impossible Burger, I'll tell you what.
Right. Huh. Well, I mean, I like how the fake meat has kind of collapsed on itself anyways. They haven't.
Yeah, don't even need to do that.
Yeah, those companies don't really exist. It didn't work. Hopefully we don't try to do something else with that.
But I've never felt sicker than after an Impossible Burger. Goodness.
I can't say I've ever eaten one.
It was horrible.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean,
what is it made? It's just made out of beans or something?
Yeah, and soybeans. I mean, it's sat so poorly. It's a. I don't advise.
Yeah, and it's not like regenerative organic soybeans either.
No, that would probably be okay.
Yeah,
this was not.
I mean, you can make the argument, like, should soybeans really be consumed in a human diet that much, anyways? But yeah, it's
no, that's definitely not organic regenerative.
All right, Kelly. Well, I know you're busy. You're doing a lot of important work. Anything else you want to mention, or where should people join you in helping with this fight?
Yeah, so follow me on Glyphosate Girl, either on Twitter or Instagram. And I have a website, Glyphosate Facts, it's called, FACTS. And then you can sign up to help on all these things I'm working on at stoppoison.org. And
Awesome.
one last thing, I'm doing a lot of things. I have to definitely put in a pitch for my main job working at American Regeneration with Ryland Engelhart. We co-founded this group, and we have amazing farmers on our advisory team, and we're trying to raise their voices up to the policy level so we can really see some meaningful change on behalf of regenerative agriculture.
You guys have done an amazing job. We're doing a co-branded event with American Regeneration at Molly Engelhart's farm the end of April, which you're going to be at as well, right?
Yeah, cannot wait.
Yeah.
That's going to be so awesome.
Yeah, it will be. It'll be very cool. I think also something that we've published lately, we have Don Huber's symposium on glyphosate that was 2 days worth of workshops that is free. I think everyone should, if you get time, to go through that. And, I think that was a pretty amazing, full of information session. So,
He's
all
the
right,
best.
Kelly. Yeah, that's a guy that has some stories.
Wow, does he have stories? Holy cow.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. That wraps up this episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in and being part of a growing community committed to soil health, land stewardship, and ecological agriculture. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and all other trusted podcast platforms. Give us a follow, give us a like. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. A big thank you to our podcast sponsors, Azure Standard and American Farmland Trust, for supporting these conversations and helping us to spread the information and message of ecological farming. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who cares about the future of farming. We'll see you next time on the Acres USA podcast.